I love edging. Always have. There's just something about the discipline, the focus of it all, the rush.
Don't you mean straight edge?
Yeah, of course. Why, what did I say? Oh my. Oh my god. Nothing has happened to straight edge. In fact, it's probably never been in a better place. Now, before we go any further, let me just preface this video by saying I'm not straight edge. My mum gave me a Bacardi Breezer when I was 8 years old, and I have never looked back. I mean, I'm not an alcoholic. Alcoholics go to meetings. But I do have this machine that allows me to pour pub-perfect pints from the comfort of my own home. Oh wow, maybe I do have a problem. And that's not to say I don't respect the movement. In fact, I'm going to try my hand at being vegan straight edge for the rest of the week. Starting now. And let me just quickly say that if you like what I do, then please do me a favor and like and subscribe. Maybe even become a member of the channel if you're super keen. It helps me get closer to quitting the job that I hate, and I can make these videos full time. But anyway, what started off as a 46-second song by a hardcore band in DC quickly became one of the biggest cultural movements that has ever been seen. But how did we get here? So it's the 1980s, and over in Washington DC, a band called Minor Threat are making some noise. Ian MacKaye decides to write a song about his personal stance on life. In it, he spoke about how he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, and he certainly doesn't do any drugs. This song is just 46 seconds long, and he calls it Straight Edge. This wasn't a manifesto or anything like that, far from it in fact. This was his declaration. His way of saying, this is who I am, and that's okay.
I'm not gonna go sell people on my ideas. I'm not gonna go out and try to get people to convert to hardcore or do whatever.
Why are you doing what you're doing?
Because it's for me, not for anyone else.
At the time, it wasn't unheard of for people to abstain from drinking and drugging, but this lifestyle choice didn't have a name yet. And it didn't for quite some time. As years went by, the hardcore scene started to get rowdier. People were going to shows to get fucked up and fuck kids up. The scene was heavy into nihilism at the time, and these kids saw this and they thought, yeah, I don't know if this is really for me. Especially when they'd rock up to a show and get sucker punched by some guy in his late 30s, 9 Coronas deep. Been there. And considering they just spent the last 16 to 17 years being sober anyway, it was quite easy for them to just say, yeah, I'll carry on doing it this way. So when Minor Threat rolled into town and the kids heard the song Straight Edge, suddenly they had a name. They weren't just the weird sober ones at the show anymore. They were Straight Edge, and with a name came a look. Right, so in America they've got this really dumb rule where you've got to be 21 to be able to drink and 17 to be able to join the military. So that makes sense. But anyway, in order for venues to make sure that the people drinking the drink was of legal age, they'd mark anyone under 21 with an X on the hand so the bar knew not to serve them, and instead of hiding it, the kids owned it. The X became a badge of honor. It was printed on t-shirts, flyers, tattoos, and even watches. Your whole identity came from a permanent Sharpie on your skin. And it wasn't just Minor Threat that were repping this way of life. Many other DC bands also followed along, like Teen Idols and The Faith. But this movement quickly expanded outside of Washington, and suddenly bands from all over the country were claiming edge. Over in Boston, you had DYS and SSD putting their name on the movement. Hardcore bands love an acronym, even though no one's actually agreed on what they stand for. And over on the West, you had Nevada's 7 Seconds and California's Uniform Choice. These weren't Minor Threat copycats. Each city gave Straight Edge its own spin about clean living and community. The common theme was simple. It was hardcore, but without the booze and nihilism, and that laid the groundwork for what came next. Because when New York found out about this new way of living, they didn't let anyone forget about it. Donnie Brasco? Al Pacino? No? I forget about it.
New York City already had a really strong hardcore scene from the get-go. You had Agnostic Front, Cro-Mags and Leeway all tearing up in the early 80s. But this scene wasn't without the same issues that the kids over in DC saw. This new way of life was slowly being adopted by the hardcore kids of NYC, and by the mid to late 80s, the New York straight edge scene got a new name. Youth Crew. Named after a Youth of Today track, this was a hardcore scene built on three things: crew cuts, hoodies, and a positive mental attitude. Instead of just screaming about how shit everything was, Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, and Bold was screaming about unity, friendship, and living clean. Just imagine a bunch of teenagers kicking each other in the nuts, shouting about being nice to one another. That was Youth Crew. Youth Crew had a distinctive look too. Kids wore varsity jackets and Nikes whilst also Xing up their hand so everyone knew that they were better than you. Musically, it was hardcore music, but even more. It was faster and catchier, with huge gang vocals you couldn't help but shout along to. And thanks to labels like Revelation Records, Youth Crew didn't just stay in New York either. Tapes and records are being traded across the country and even overseas. Suddenly, being straight edge wasn't just a DC or a New York thing, it was becoming an international identity.
And this is where the movement really began to evolve, because it wasn't enough just to say no to drugs anymore. Some bands started talking about vegetarianism and veganism, and even spirituality. Straight edge was expanding, and it was about to get a whole lot more militant. Over time, people started to take straight edge more seriously. Like, way more seriously.
Judge were already showing the more extreme side of Youth Crew and straight edge. They took that clean-cut image and cranked the aggression with heavier riffs, tougher lyrics, and a much more confrontational attitude.
If Gorilla Biscuits was singing about friendship and fun, then Judge was screaming that you better be living a clean life or you'll be getting a knuckle sandwich, buster. Probably. And that attitude set the stage for what came next.
By the early 90s, straight edge wasn't just about positive youth anymore. It started getting militant. Youth of Today had already sowed the seed for veganism with their song No More, but Earth Crisis were bringing in animal rights with a lot more heat. Their song Firestorm wasn't just about living clean, it called for purging society of drug dealers, cartels, and corrupt politicians.
Corrupt politicians, corrupt enforcement, drug lords and dudes, almost full, the hopeless are crying out.
Subtle, right? This militancy gave straight edge a reputation. Crews popped up in different cities, sometimes clashing with people at shows or even out on the street. For some, straight edge became less of a personal choice and more of a crusade. And it was out of this militant vibe that spawned the hardline movement. Bands like Vegan Reich argued for an even stricter code. No drugs, no alcohol, no meat, no abortion, but they didn't stop there. No birth control, no homosexuality, no coffee, no wanking, no chocolate, no sugar, no tropical fruit. Basically, if it gave you any sort of pleasure, hardliners probably had it on the no-no list.
And here I was thinking that straight edge kids just didn't like people sucking on their blue raspberry sour Lost Mary.
Whoa, you're drinking iced tea. I said, yeah. I was like, this is unsweetened iced tea. Yeah. He was like, well, my friend says caffeine's a drug. I said, oh, tell your friend, fuck you.
Eventually, these guys thought of themselves as so far apart from straight edge kids that they decided to remove the X entirely from their logo, and they criticized the movement a lot. I forgot the word I was going to say. But on the other side, you had Krishnacore, which is kind of what it says on the tin. Hardcore, but it was inspired by the Hare Krishna tradition.
Ray Cappo and John Porcelli of Youth of Today founded Shelter, a band that is kind of considered to be the band that started the whole subculture of a subculture of a subculture.
Some argue that Cro-Mags were technically first with Age of Quarrel, but Shelter really branded it into its own thing.
It was still hardcore, it was still straight edge, it just had more mantras and Krishna imagery on stage.
Some kids loved the whole spiritual angle. Others thought it was a bit too much.
But this whole movement wasn't just fixed to the US. By the 90s, straight edge became a worldwide movement, with some places hitting even harder. In Europe, you had the 8000 scene from Belgium.
I won't go into too much detail because you can just watch my video on the whole scene, but essentially, a bunch of small towns in a corner of the country managed to birth an entire wave of vegan, straight edge metalcore.
You had bands like Liar, Congress, Nations on Fire all playing breakdowns whilst radicalising the youth to live clean.
The UK had a whole thing going on too, but that's probably an entire video in itself, so you should like and subscribe if you'd like to see that video. Nice.
And then there's Indonesia, with one of the largest straight edge communities in the world. In Bandung, they embraced straight edge, calling it positive punk, taking huge inspo from the state's youth crew movement, but they also adapted it to their context. They had the classic no booze, no drugs, no tobacco, but some of the strictest rules from the US scene were considered more flexible, like shagging, for example. Straight edge was considered a personal choice rather than a moral right. You had bands like Manusia Buatan, KxHx, and Domestik Doktrin leading the charge, using their music and zines to spread the message, but it wasn't always smooth. A lot of straight-edge Indonesians faced pushback, with many being labelled as just good Muslims, rather than straight-edge punk kids. They wanted straight edge to be its own identity, revolving around hardcore, and not to be lumped in with conservative Islam.
And that was sort of the story with straight edge. It wasn't for everyone. To a lot of people, especially the old heads, straight edge felt too preachy. You even had people mocking it with a joke scene called bent edge. It didn't really catch on.
Meanwhile, the mainstream media started spinning these straight edge crews as violent youth gangs.
So what's the catch? 12 News reporter Rich Jaffe discovered the group has earned a reputation in parts of the country as a violent neo-Nazi gang.
And actually, Salt Lake City police even classified 3 punk factions, straight edge, vegan straight edge, and hardliners, as criminal gangs, claiming that these crews were pro-violence and were responsible for a number of stabbings and assaults, although this was mostly due to hardliners firebombing fast food places and clothes shops. Although the media did want better and called it domestic terrorism though.
But whether you thought this was the future of hardcore or just a bunch of teenagers yelling at you, straight edge had made its mark. And even if you didn't agree with the movement, you couldn't escape its influence. And this influence didn't just stay underground.
By the 2000s, straight edge was everywhere. In pop culture, in fashion, in wrestling. It began spreading into the mainstream.
It got to the point where you didn't even have to step foot in a sweaty DIY basement to know what straight edge was.
All you had to do was turn on the TV on a Monday night. This is CM Punk. Millions of people who had never even heard of Minor Threat suddenly knew about straight edge because a wrestler was screaming about his straight edge society on Monday Night Raw. Or even James Hetfield of Metallica. When the bloke finally got sober, he marked with a straight edge style X tattoo on his wrist. The frontman of the most famous metal band in the world, the guy behind Master of Puppets, showing off his edge symbol, but nothing would prepare the world for straight edge like Nike was about to do. In 2005, Nike straight up ripped off Minor Threat's album art for a skateboarding ad campaign. Punk kids went ballistic. Nike pulled it, and honestly, that probably made the story even bigger. And if anything, it just proved how iconic straight edge imagery had become.
But as straight edge started to become a cultural phenomenon, it began to evolve in hardcore too. The 2000s brought in a whole wave of new bands, and even some of the biggest edge shows that has ever been seen. At this point, straight edge wasn't going anywhere. Sure, some people thought the whole thing was too preachy and self-righteous, but the 90s had bands like Floorpunch and Mouthpiece and Carrying On the Flame.
But in the 2000s, you had Champion, who basically became the straight edge hardcore band of the era. They toured everywhere, from Europe to Japan, each show being a teaching into the gospel that is edging. But of course they weren't alone. There was also Down to Nothing and Throwdown keeping the dance floor alive.
Speaking of dancing, where were you on October 17th, 1999? Me? I was at home with the wife and kids, but for others, they're at 10-Yard Fight's final ever show. A show so iconic that what was supposed to be a one-off ended up becoming a yearly tradition. Just without 10-Yard Fights.
They call it Edge Day, and every October 17th, straight edge kids celebrate it like a holiday. Shows pop up all over the world in Boston, the UK, Sweden, Brazil, all packed with X'd up hands, stage dives, and a whole lot of kids screaming about what it means to be edge.
Sorry, I was just rereading the script, and there's a band I forgot to mention. I know this is so embarrassing. Right, so this band is so important, not just to straight edge, but to hardcore entirely. You guys know who I'm talking about, don't you? That's right, guys. Say it with me. Sleep Token. Have Heart. Just Have Heart.
I'm not kidding when I said Have Heart are one of the most important hardcore bands of the 2000s and beyond. Although they're a straight edge band from Boston, their lyrics didn't just talk about being drug-free. They spoke about alienation, community, and hope, which made them resonate with edge kids and non-edge kids alike. Unfortunately, Have Heart broke up in 2009, only to reform in 2019 and put on one of the biggest straight edge shows, one of the biggest hardcore shows of all time. 10,000 people all packed in a room in Worcester, Massachusetts. If anyone thought straight edge was dead, have heart proved otherwise.
Okay. Maybe it was 8,560. Maybe.
By this point, straight edge wasn't just confined to straight edge bands anymore. The influence had grown so big that even if a band wasn't technically a straight edge band, odds are at least one member was, like the boys in No Relief. They're not a straight edge band, but they have members who are. Same with my mates in Blind Ambition. They may not be shouting about being straight edge, it's mostly about being depressed and beating people up, but that doesn't take away from the fact that some members are still straight edge.
That's just how much edge has seeped into hardcore DNA, even if you weren't meant to seep at all. Oh, but if you call yourself a straight edge band, then every one of you has to be straight edge. And if one of you breaks, that's it, you've got to quit. You've got to end it there. Sorry, I don't make the rules.
But still, straight edge is stronger than ever. We've got bands like Magnitude and World of Pleasure carrying the flag way beyond what was thought possible back in the late 80s, especially with xWeaponx. A straight edge band that consists of members of Knocked Loose, one of the biggest metalcore bands out there right now. Now, people who don't even know who Ian MacKaye is but like Knocked Loose will hear about this side project and learn what it means to be edge.
However, I'm not wrong in saying that the culture has shifted. Modern edge is a lot less militant and more personal, unless you're in the band No Cure, who happened to drop a really sick t-shirt that Twitter really didn't like. But as I was saying, you've got queer edge and feminist edge and a whole lot more inclusivity than what you did have in the 90s. The only thing we don't have is edge. Man, I miss that guy. But really, the idea is still the same. Hardcore without self-destruction. Straight edge hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, it's bigger, more global, and more diverse than it's ever been. So what happened to straight edge? Nothing. It's still here. It's in basements in DC. It's in Belgium and Bangdang. The X is still everywhere. And me? Well, I still love edging. But I'm also a pretty big fan of straight edge as well. I've been James. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed. Cheers.